and welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the wonderful Kirsha Fox, author of Son of Deception, and the newly released The White Leaf Child. She's a homeschooling mom of 4, avid reader and gamer.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, author, editor, and author coach. She is a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, we're very excited to welcome Lindsey Kinsella onto the show tonight. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, but Kirsha will tell you all about him.
Sure. Lindsey Kinsella, born 1991, is a Scottish writer and author of the science fiction novel The Lazarus Taxa. While a qualified and experienced naval architect and an avid classic car enthusiast, he always reserved space in his life for his deep fascination with paleontology. This drove his writing process as he aspired to write stories about the rich and complex history of life on Earth.
Welcome.
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're very excited. We love to get international authors because I find it so interesting. Especially you writing about dinosaurs, correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's been sort of my niche thus far.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your series and how you got your start as a writer.
Yeah, so I started like probably a similar story to a lot of relatively new authors, but my kickstart was really the COVID-19 lockdowns that we had. I found that suddenly I had so much more free time than before, and not much else to be doing, and it kind of, for all that it was hardly a good time for anyone. It offered an opportunity that I hadn't had before to chase that dream, if you like, and write myself a book. And it just sort of grew arms and legs from there.
Very nice. So is it the story that you were always a big reader and then you started to write your own stories, that like that kind of journey? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think another thing that sort of happened when life sort of slowed down a lot over that time is that I did start to read more again as well, which sort of added to that. It kind of revived what was sort of an old dream from when I was a lot younger of writing a book. And it almost sort of reminded me, I was like, yeah, I would quite like to do this. And I felt like I could do this. So I thought I would give it a bash. I didn't, I had nothing to lose.
Yeah,
and I had nothing else going on. So
nothing but time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your writing process. How do you go from beginning to ending, from idea to published book?
Yeah, so I'm only on. My second book is due to be published next week, end of this week actually.
Yes, congratulations.
So, thank you. But yeah, only being on my second book, I think I'm still sort of ironing out my process somewhat. But yeah, I think recently I've versed more over to plotting out a story a little more in advance. I tend to start from like a sort of skeleton, so I'll write, beginning to end, generally kind of shorthand. It'll be a very short story, it'll be, maybe 40 pages or something, and then I'll keep working through it and I'll flesh it out and I'll continue that, and I'll lose count of the number of drafts that I do. But it kind of grows almost from the inside out, if that makes sense.
It does. That actually makes a lot of sense.
So you've always had this love for paleontology. What drove you to write about dinosaurs in your story, though? Tell us a little bit about your dinosaur world. Like, is it an alternative history or?
So it's a science fiction setting where it's basically set currently. I've tried to keep it as kind of down to earth as it can be while still being, a story about dinosaurs. And the idea is that it's the sort of early stages of the development of time travel, and the idea being that the technology is still sort of new, and it's still kind of rugged and clunky, and it's not very effective. So just to try and, as best as possible with what is effectively a time travel story full of dinosaurs, keep it grounded. And yeah, so the idea is that most of the story takes place 6 to 8 million years ago in the end Cretaceous.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the sort of paleontology side of things, I think it really stemmed from being a child. I mean, I think most kids have a dinosaur phase, and I just didn't really grow out of mine.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that there was a sort of growing frustration over the years at how popular culture wasn't really keeping up with the science, because it's a very fast-moving science. It's a relatively new science. I mean, it's a couple hundred years, something like that, which in the grand scheme of things isn't long, which means we're still always learning so much. And I think since sort of the 90s, popular culture hasn't kept up with that. So it got to the point where I thought, if no one else is going to bring the new stuff to sort of culture, then I'll give it a bash myself.
Yeah, I love that.
Do your characters have to sort of survive this environment that they found themselves into? Is it akin to like Jurassic Park, but you're actually back there? Like, is it scary, or is it more of like educational, more of an educational adventure?
It's a little of both. I tried to sort of make sure that I did bring this sort of new, updated world of dinosaurs to the reader, and it is educating. I mean, I even sort of break away from the story at certain times to have sort of intermittent chapters where I just kind of talk about the science a little. I try and do it in a way that feels fluent, but I also don't try and sort of wedge it into kind of exposition within the story, because I think that can sometimes come across a bit clunky. So I just take a side for a moment and here's a couple of pages just about the science, just to give you some background. And then we'll jump back into the story, and then a lot of it will sort of make sense.
I've read other books that do that. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, and it's but it works.
Yeah, it's kind of like The Martian meets Jurassic Park, like from the sound of it, because there's a lot of science in or not The Martian. What is it? Is it The Martian?
The Martian, where he finds himself within a new culture and he's learning about it from the
inside. No, the one where he is.
Oh wait, no,
on Mars.
Not The Martian, the Princess of Mars, right?
The astronaut stranded on Mars.
Yeah, the one where he's stranded on Mars and he's got to figure out how to survive.
Martian, isn't it?
I think that is what it's called. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, our little moment. So I like that, because like the science is often very interesting, but it's like you said, it's hard to fit into a story cohesively and smoothly at times, because you don't want to be doing like on the nose dialogue, like, as you know, Bob, when scientists or when dinosaurs existed, So I think that's a really, really great workaround that you do. What do you think is the most important part of writing when you do sit down to write?
Oh, that's a big question. That's a big question.
We're asking the loaded ones today.
And I think for me, trying to keep characters relatable to the reader is, I mean, arguably the most difficult part as well. But I think particularly when you're dealing with a setting that is sort of kind of inherently outlandish, and to keep that disbelief from seeping in too much to the reader, keep characters relatable, and I think that often involves writing them with flaws and just real people making often bad decisions. And I think if you have people who are too good at their role within the story, I think that can remove the reader. I certainly think that. So yeah, I think keeping everything a little down to earth, even when everything else is a bit wild and even bordering on silly at times.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. You have to keep them relatable. You have to let them grow. You have to, because no one's perfect. So if your characters are, they're not going to work, are they?
Yeah. Especially because, like, I know a lot of people will write, like, kind of all powerful or they're good at everything kind of characters. And then it's like, well, I don't need to read the book because we know they're going to succeed in the end, right? So it's much more interesting to have, like, flawed characters that, you can really relate to, for sure.
Yeah, and I think particularly within the sort of genre that I write, I mean, I generally write sci-fi or fantasy. I think sci-fi in particular can be quite guilty of that at times. You have your sort of almost superhero type characters thrown into stories,
Right.
who, on top of not being relatable, you never really feel like they're in any risk. You never really feel like there's any danger.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it takes all the tension right out of the book.
Yeah. Whereas I think if you have I mean, sometimes you have a character who's a borderline idiot, just because it keeps you on the keeps the reader on their toes.
Yeah, it makes things interesting for sure.
Do you have a favorite author? And sort of why? What do you admire about them? I know it's kind of an impossible question, but
it is, and I sort of obviously as an author, you get sort of asked this all the time. What authors inspired you, and it's so hard to really pick one. But I think if I did have to, it's probably quite a sort of uninspired, unoriginal choice. But I think for me, Stephen King was the writer who kind of set me on the path to want to write. Because those were really the first books that I ever loved reading. And I think back to what I read as a kid, and I was probably too young for reading those books in hindsight. But I remember reading Pet Sematary and thinking that it was just it was this amazing use of tension and this amazing sort of subversion of a character. And I think that's probably the one book. Is that my favorite? It might be my favorite book. Admittedly, it was a long time ago I read it, and sometimes you don't want to go back because it's not as good as you remember. So I don't know if I'll go back. But yeah, I love the way that Stephen King builds that tension and the way that he writes horror. And I think even though I would classify The Lazarus Taxa as sci-fi, I think it definitely has horror elements in places which are very much Stephen King inspired.
And that's
definitely, I would definitely like to write a sort of outright horror at some point. I think that would be
it's fun.
Good fun.
It is fun.
It is fun.
I really enjoy it because I sit there. It's just a fun exercise. Sit there and be like, what scares me and why, and how can I put that into a story to scare someone else? Like it is very, very enjoyable. As like mean as that sounds, but
no, I get it. I think it is quite sadistic, but I totally agree.
Right. Yeah.
It's fun to read and it's fun to write. You get to experience all of that from the safety from behind your book, behind your computer screen. But it's so much fun to dive into these experiences that we wouldn't otherwise actually really even want to be in.
Right. And I don't know if you use the hero's journey for writing your stories, but hero's journey also works really well for horror because you are entering into a new world like you would for fantasy or sci-fi, and you have to learn all the rules and how everything works and stuff. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's on the to-do list. Although I think that's the trouble with being a writer is that the to-do list takes many years to work through.
Right. More ideas than you have time to write. Usually.
Yeah, choosing the next project as a sort of year and a half commitment. It's
right.
Choice.
Yeah.
There's never enough time, ever. Awesome. So you mentioned Stephen King. Do you feel like you might have a preference for like more plot-driven stories or like more character-driven stories? And do you see that reflected in your own writing?
I think I tend to write more plot-driven. I mean, it's often hard to separate the two because you need elements of both. You can't just have characters and no plot, and you can't have vice versa. But I think I tend to have quite relatively large scale stories to tell,
Mm-hmm.
which are the story tends to be bigger than the characters. So yeah, I would err on the plot side, but it is important to me to have good characters too.
Oh yes,
Right.
you absolutely can't neglect the characters or the plot, but like the emphasis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it would be nice at some point just to throw some variety in there, to do like a real character driven piece where you just really focus in on
Right.
someone. Because I like to kind of mix it up, and
Yeah.
I've written sci-fi. My new book's fantasy.
Oh.
Very much aimed at a different audience as well. One was adult, one sort of young adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm in the very early processes of a first draft of the next book, which is sort of bordering on horror, but much more down to earth and
Okay.
kind of darker and grittier and more sort of very adult. So yeah, I tend to mix things up a little from one book to
Yeah. So sort of like dark fantasy, like getting into horror elements.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I know you are a newer author, but what do you feel a lot of authors may neglect when they write?
It's a hard one to say, because I think it feels, as a new author, it feels very judgmental to say that other writers don't do things. Because it's probably
What about as a reader?
yeah, there's probably a lot I'm guilty of too. But I think that one thing I sort of pick up on is, and I suppose something I've mentioned earlier that I try hard not to do, is really cramming in exposition particularly into dialogue. I feel like quite
Right.
often you have a lot of really unnatural exposition
Mhm.
and dialogue. And I always find that something that sort of really throws me out of the book. It's one of those things where I'm reading it and I'm removed from the story and I start picturing the writer writing it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Equally though, I get it. It's hard. It's not
Right.
easy to get
Absolutely.
that naturally.
There's nothing easy about this business.
No, it's one of the hardest jobs to because you're just dealing with so many different threads and weaving them together into a picture, and it can be very tricky. Yeah.
That's and yeah, I think there's always the thought that if 100 people read your book and you've got even the tiniest little plot hole, one of them's going to find it. Somewhere
Right.
it is.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes people like to point out plot holes or issues with like for the Harry Potter series, for example. And I'm like, yes, if you have like 100 million eyes on this one book, like, yeah, you're gonna find inconsistencies and issues with it. I don't think that she ever expected that level when she first wrote them.
It's a lot of scrutiny.
The level of
A
scrutiny.
lot of
Yes.
scrutiny. Yeah, but if you get a bad review, that means you're in very good company, because like even the classics that they teach in school have bad reviews, or people are like, "Oh, this is the worst book in the
Yes.
world. Why did I even read it?" So
I've heard that advice a lot, that if you get a bad review and you feel bad about it, like look up your favorite book and read all of those bad reviews.
right, because there will be a lot of them. Yeah.
No, that's and I suppose it's sort of like any sort of art form, it is subjective. I don't think there's probably not a single universally loved book
No. Yeah.
or movie or painting,
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think
Everyone
it
has
exists.
different tastes, and for sure. What have you learned from the writing process as a new author?
So I think particularly for the first book, I think more so when I got editor comments back, I learned a lot in terms of just sort of etiquette when it comes to the writing style that you use, things that as a reader I never even picked up on. Certain
Right.
punctuation shouldn't be used, and certain layout formalities. So there's a lot of that, but I think what I've really found with the new book, the sort of real evolution in my writing process, what I learned between the two, is that it's really it can't be anywhere near a sort of one man show. There are so many other people that you have to bring in to make it, such a good finished product. And I think that's something that a lot of new writers, myself included, at the time, would be willing to overlook as beta readers. I got some really amazing beta readers for my new book, The Heart of Pangea, and I don't think it would be half the story it is without some really good insights and some really good, and I don't think maybe writers don't give them enough credit sometimes. I don't know, maybe that's just me, because it's something that I'd barely heard about from other author interviews, and it's something that I found was just a world of help, really, and really kind of grew the book and refined it to the stage where, I think in my first book I had many pages of editor comments that came back. The second one round, it was really just spelling and punctuation that I got back from the end of this
very nice.
That's really all down to just having some really kind of switched on beta readers, people who understand the storytelling process. And, I think that's probably the best thing I did for this book compared to the last one. I mean, the last one I had beta readers, but this one I had a lot of beta readers.
Yes.
And in that, just having a wide range of ideas and comments is good, but then just from having so many, you have that little handful that are just absolute gems.
Yes, I find that some beta readers are afraid to comment because they feel like they're going to insult you or make you feel bad about your story. And I'm like, no, tell me everything. Tell me your reactions. Tell me what you liked or what you didn't like. Tell me, highlight things. Just go to town. Go to town on this book. But it really does help us produce a much better book, a much stronger book than it would have been otherwise.
It does, and I think I sort of led with that when I kind of introduced the idea to any beta readers that I was dealing with. I was like, look, I would rather hear some really harsh criticism now than in 6 months' time from a reviewer. I'd like to know now when I can still fix it.
Right, absolutely. How about from the publishing process? Is there anything you learned from the publishing process?
I think the publishing process is, I mean, I'm self-published, so I publish through Amazon and through Barnes and Noble and those kind of places. And the actual publishing process is remarkably easy, to the point where it's perhaps almost too easy. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of putting something out there that's not ready. So I think that's the big thing with publishing, is making sure that you're absolutely certain that it is ready for publishing, because it's very easy. I mean, you can upload a manuscript and a cover, and in a couple of days it's up for sale.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's no one to stop you.
Well,
For good and for bad,
There's no one to look it over and tell you it's good enough.
That's
right.
Yeah.
That's it.
You're the last person who decides if it's good enough, and that's what you put up.
Yeah, and that's quite it's quite scary almost. I mean,
it is a little intimidating. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned in the bio that I work as an architect. That's my sort of day job. And at no point ever in my career is it only my say if something's good enough. No point hand in a design or even a calculation or a drawing and say, I've done this and I've decided it's fine, hand it over to it. It doesn't happen. It gets picked by 3 or 4 other people before it goes out the door. So the fact that you can write an entire novel and there's no one there to make sure that it's okay, it's quite intimidating. So you have to be really meticulous and have a really good editor that you trust.
Yeah. So important to have that trust in the relationship with your editor. For sure.
Yeah.
If you could give advice to a new author, what would you tell them?
I think there are probably a million things that could help. But I think for me, the big thing I would say is that to get past that first hump is to not be disheartened when you finish your first draft, because you will read the first draft and it will be a dumpster fire. It will be horrifically bad. And you'll think about just packing it in. You'll think about, I tried. Everyone's is. I'm pretty sure. Maybe there are some people who I think Asimov was famous for throwing out his first drafts, but other than that, everyone's first draft is terrible.
Right.
I hope it's not just me. I
agree with you completely.
No, they're called rough drafts for a reason, because they are rough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think if you don't have that experience of writing that first draft that's awful, and then working through the process of making it better into something that you are proud of, if you haven't experienced that already, it can, I mean, I found it myself, it can be really disheartening to read the story you've written and think, this is terrible, this is awful. So I think my advice is just, stick with it. It's supposed to be awful. It will be at this stage. You've got time to fix it.
Yeah, and especially for people who are pantsers or fly by the seat of their pants, like oftentimes the first draft is them just telling themselves the story. So you have to recraft it into telling someone else the story, right? So once you figured it out, then you go back and finesse and do all the magic that is rewriting. But I always love the quote, and I can never remember who says it, but it's, I'm just shoveling sand into boxes to build sandcastles later. That's what the rough draft is. You're just getting all the materials you need in there, and then you're going to like really work with it and make it into something special.
You can't edit a blank page. So
Right.
The first version has to exist. That's
absolutely it. And I think that's, I think I saw a statistic a while back that something like 90% of people who attempt to write a book never finish, and I think that's probably why that sort of it's no good.
Right.
And it's like, it isn't. I'm not going to argue with you. Yeah, it's not good.
Right.
But you can make it good.
Yeah, writing is not the easiest thing in the world, but it is very rewarding, especially if you're a creative person. Just creating anything when you're a creative person is so replenishing to your inner self.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I think that probably most of us have got, even people that maybe wouldn't describe themselves as creative, we've all got a little bit of that need to make something of our own.
Right. I think it's Picasso who said, like, all children are artists. We just forget as we get older. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true. Or maybe not even forget. We just we repress it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's for other people, because I think that's why I was relatively late in life. I mean, I was sort of almost 30 when I started writing, which I don't know if that's late or not. I don't know, but. I think that's why it took me so long to start, because I had this sort of impression that was for other people to do. People don't just write books. That's for authors. They're away doing their own. So I think we repress that part of ourselves sometimes.
Right. I think it's very common because we have this idea of, like, if I'm not the best at it, then I shouldn't be doing it, right? Amateur is kind of a dirty word to some people, even though it just means a labor of love. Literally, that's what the word means. So I think that even if you do something poorly, if it brings you joy, you should do it, right? So
and I mean, the people who are the best at it, I mean, they weren't always. They wrote the first draft of a first book once that was probably horrifically bad.
Yeah,
unless you're Stephen King,
for sure.
Stephen King's first novel was Carrie, and that was not bad, unfortunately.
True. I don't think he's ever let anyone read his first draft. I bet
that's true. I
tell myself that it was awful. It makes me feel better.
What I really love about writing is there is not a cutoff date for when it's too late, that you'll never get to be a writer. You can start any time where you are right now.
Yeah, I've heard of people starting in their 50s and getting published at 60. And it's just wonderful that there's so much opportunity. The good thing about self-publishing is there's more opportunity to make your dream come true, even though it's terrifying.
there is, and I think there's also a lot more flexibility as well. You know, you don't have a deadline from anyone.
Right.
It's finished when it's ready.
Mhm.
Because my current book, I had sort of originally told myself that I would have it out in January this year, so it's about 6 months late.
Right.
But, you know, it's only late for myself. I never told anyone it was coming in January, you know, and it does offer you that flexibility. I'm not sure that a traditional publisher would just accept, you know, I'm going to need another 6 months. I don't think.
Right. Well, speaking of that and deadlines and setting your own timeline, you have a day job. So how do you make time for writing?
With great difficulty, if I'm honest. Yeah, I mean, I have a day job. I have 3 children. I have a little side business where I organise events, and when we spoke about sort of like classic cars, I organise classic car shows. Now, like I mentioned, over COVID is when I started writing, so things like events that didn't happen.
Right.
So I had all this free time, and now post-COVID, now I've got 2 things going on. So my process at the moment is I just write late at night when everyone else is in bed. Sort of now really is sort of my typical writing time. So that's when I squeeze it in. I'm sort of a bit of a night owl anyway, so that kind of works for me. But yeah, it's tricky, and I think that's why it sort of takes me, you know. I mean, I think both books have taken around about 1.5 years to write. So yeah, it's a long process when you've only got an hour or 2 in a day to do some writing.
Well,
it really is tricky.
Your books are actually fairly long, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they're both sort of between 400 and 500 pages.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, those are very large books.
I think it's what the first book was 90,000 words. The current one is sort of 70,000 words. Aimed at a younger audience. I tried to keep that a little shorter.
Right.
But yeah. I mean, they're reasonably big books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally feel you on the lack of time. I've got the 4 kids and I homeschool on top of that, and just being a mom, and everyone is like, how do you find time? And I'm like, I don't know. I steal it. As you're driving, you think about it as you're doing your everyday normal tasks. It's just always going on in the back of your head. You know, you'll be doing something else and you'll randomly have an idea that you got to jot down really fast before you lose it. And then you go on doing what you're doing the rest of your day until you can get home and type it all out.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think sometimes those moments when you're out and about and you're doing other stuff and you have those kind of moments of inspiration, I think they're almost as important as actually sitting down and writing.
Absolutely. Mulling over it.
You know, because there are times when, you know, you'll write just because you have time to write, but you don't really know where it's going, and a few weeks later you scrap what you wrote. Whereas, if you're just out and about and you're like, oh, I have an idea, you know, the next time you write, it's productive. You know where you're going.
Yeah, those are gems for sure. Yeah, the unexpected aha moments. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite part of writing?
I think I've sort of, having, you know, kind of reached the end of the current book, I've obviously started on the next one, and I've rediscovered the joy of a first draft. I say rediscover, I don't know if I really appreciated how fun a first draft was before, because I was so sort of concerned with, is this good? And I think now, you know, I'm on my 3rd book now. I'm now of the mindset that I've accepted that it won't be. There's sort of a weight lifted off once you've accepted that the first draft is going to be. And yeah, I'm really enjoying writing a first draft of the current book. I think that's probably my new favorite part of writing. I didn't really appreciate it before. And just that having a blank page, blank canvas, you can do what you want, and you know you can fix it later if you need to. But you can, allow yourself to just go off on tangents and explore things. And I'm enjoying my first draft.
Yes.
Good. We're glad to hear that. I think that it's so fun. There's no feeling quite like the feeling like when you get done writing and you're like, oh, I got in 1,000 words today, or however many you got in. It's just such a good feeling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, sometimes little things like just, a little, maybe a scene that's been floating around in your head for a while, and you get the chance to write that scene and you finish it and you're like, yeah, that's good. That's what I wanted.
Right.
I think that's really quite satisfying. When you close your laptop at the end of the night and you go, that was productive. It may not have necessarily been many words, but I'm like, they were good words. I like those.
Yeah, those are good words. That's a good feeling for sure.
That is a lot of joy there. To write something new and feel really good about it.
Yeah, I mean, that it doesn't always happen,
Right. Yes. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's like,
you're like, I'll probably delete that later, but that's just a placeholder.
Right.
It's true.
I use placeholders sometimes where I'll just put like in brackets, like write the scene where the character does this and move on.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like I know if I try to like slog through the scene, like when I'm not ready to write it, it's just not going to come out well, and it's something that I can revisit after I know what happens after, So
yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll sort of skip whole chapters where I'm like, I know where they are, I know where I want them to be in a few chapters.
Right.
I haven't quite figured out how they're going to get there, but I'll just, I'll skip a bit and I'll
right. Skip and come back.
Which tends to result in plot holes, which I have to fix further down the road.
Right.
It's part of the process.
It's part of the process.
It is. So, rough draft is your favorite part of writing. Do you have a least favorite part of writing?
I think my least favorite part is sort of the very latter stages of editing, and specifically when you get to the point where you have to decide if it's finished.
Yes.
I can't
I
stand
feel
the pressure of that
you.
decision, because it'll never be perfect. There's always something that you could refine. There's always something you could change, however small a detail it might be. But there sort of has to come a point where you say, okay, it's done.
It's good enough.
And it's such a difficult decision, and it's really difficult to not just go one more draft.
Right.
But then you worry, is that the wrong decision? Should there be one more draft? Is it one draft away? So yeah, I hate that decision. I'm not good at that.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's nobody else looking at it and giving it their stamp of approval. There's no one else to say, yes, it's good enough. It's all up to you to decide when it's good enough. And that's a kind of a terrifying responsibility.
Yeah.
You've just sunk 1.5 years into this thing. So you don't want to send it out before it's ready, and why put in all that work if it's not going to be the best it could be? But you're right.
Exactly it.
There is a point where you have to take your hands away from the keyboard and be like, it's done, it's finished. This is as good as it's going to be.
Yeah, because I mean, you could spend 10 years on it if you really wanted.
There's also the concept that, like, when you're painting, that one brushstroke too many or that one color too many, where it just muddles the picture too, though, where you have to keep in mind that, like, you can fiddle something to death.
that is entirely true, and I think there are certainly times, I mean, all throughout the process, really, but there are times where you have an idea and you think, oh, this could be cool, or even times where I've fully written in entire subplots and then had to go back and think, that's too much. It's too much. Take that back out.
One element too many, right?
Yeah, which can be hard because sometimes you can be quite proud of that little subplot and think that's a really good little story, but you
can find a home for it somewhere else, though, because I never delete anything for good. I have like a leftovers file that I'm like, this could go somewhere else and work. So kill your darlings is hard for me, so I don't delete anything permanently.
Yeah, I sort of do the same. I mean, I have all the sort of old drafts still saved. I don't necessarily have specific scenes or plot threads, but
right.
I do have, the drafts which contain those elements still saved, and maybe one day I'll reuse them. I think I had a chapter from that. There was a whole chapter from the Lazarus taxa, which I had to delete.
Yeah.
It was such a painful decision to delete it, and it was.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was quite a well-written chapter. There was this sort of area where I spoke about how the sort of time machine technology is it's still new, and it's buggy, and it's prone to malfunctions. And this great chapter I wrote where it's overheating, and they're trying to fix it, and I had these lovely little details where the needles in the dials were starting to drip because they were melting from the heat, and I thought they were great.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then I got to the end of the draft and I was like, I don't need that chapter anymore. The
Right.
purpose that I had in mind for that chapter wasn't needed. So yeah,
yeah.
that sits on a hard drive somewhere, which maybe I'll get the chance to use one day.
Right. Like I said, you can always rehome things, or at least what you liked about the chapters, those little details, like the melting, hands. Yeah, you can always rework that into something else.
Sometimes I like to reopen them just to see kind of how far I've come,
Right.
or how it began, where those seeds of those ideas began. But yes, I recently had like a couple of chapters that I had to pull out, but they were so good. But they were so good that I was like, you know what? This is its own book. This is its own prequel. So now I'm taking those chapters and they're going to be their own book now.
That's quite a result, to be fair.
Yes.
Right. Spin-offs are possible. There's lots you can do with the time machine. So
absolutely.
I don't feel like any writing is ever wasted. You either reuse it, or it's something that you use to become better at your craft, or that stays with you.
Yeah, and I think the hardest to cut out are characters. If you have to cut a character,
oh yes,
that's heartbreaking. Yeah, you're like, I know you so well though, and now I have to kill you off like you never existed. Yeah, oh my gosh, heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it's sometimes there's a character who sort of you lose a use for throughout the story, and you can sort of kill them off or write them out or do something interesting with them. And then sometimes you're just like, you don't serve a purpose to as a whole, and I'm sorry, it's just like you never existed. I think that's somehow sadder than killing one off.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's very relatable.
Right. So, what influences your writing? Would you say?
So I think I sort of take influence from quite a number of places. I mean, obviously, other books and reading are a sort of typical, influence for an author.
Right.
But I think I find a lot of inspiration in kind of nonfiction, whether it's books or documentaries. I mean, I think I found a lot of inspiration for the new draft that I'm working on just now actually came from watching David Attenborough documentaries. I've got some really interesting sort of wildlife concepts that could translate into some good books here. So yeah, I like to sort of draw in from areas where maybe I wouldn't have previously thought to look into.
That makes a lot of sense for you.
Yeah, I think really great writing advice is read widely, because you can learn something from every genre, like how to develop relationships from romance and the world building from fantasy and sci-fi. Like there's so much to glean from reading an eclectic range of books.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of interesting as well. I mean, I like to think that, I mean, I'm only 2 books in, so I'm sort of looking at the future here, but I like to think that I would write quite an eclectic collection of books as well.
Yeah.
I have quite a wide range of taste when it comes to reading, or even when it comes to consuming, sort of other media, movies, TV, that kind of thing. I do have quite a wide range. I like sci-fi, fantasy. I like horror. I like comedy. I think comedy's possibly the hardest to write, actually. But
hard to be funny on the page. Yeah, so hard.
But yeah, I mean, I think at some point, because I think one of my favourite authors, I know we mentioned Stephen King, at sort of other end of the spectrum would be Douglas Adams, who
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Sadly died just recently. I was a bit sad
Yeah.
to say that.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to write the way Douglas. I could never do it. I could never come close. And
Right.
maybe one day I'll hone that skill. But I would love to just be that funny and kind of so sort of whimsical and silly, but also be able to tell a good story at the same time. I aspire to write a book as good as
Yes.
any of his books one day.
Don't we all? If we could all
Right.
write, even though
Right.
like Douglas Adams. Yeah.
Have you ever checked out Grady Hendrix?
I haven't, no.
He is a horror comedy writer. So he wrote like Horror Store, which is like an IKEA type store that turns out to be a horror horrific place. My Best Friend's Exorcism. But if you like the kind of the comedy and the horror, like that'd be a good one to check
I'd
out.
never. I mean, I considered crossing comedy with fantasy and with sci-fi, crossing comedy with horror.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very
that could be really
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah,
It's tricky, but you can do it.
I think it would certainly be interesting to not have the comedy undercut the horror, but still do proper horror in places and still have it be properly scary in places.
In horror and drama and all the thrillers, those tense moments, you do need a bit of levity, right? So I think when balanced, it works well.
Yeah.
Those little unexpected bursts of just laughter that you get from from building up all those tense situations.
And then you have a really horrific scene right after it, and the audience is like, "What are you doing to me?"
Yeah, it's almost like a kind of writing exercise, like a little challenge, just that getting that balance right. Without them detracting from each other, have them complement each other, even with that kind of contrast. It's difficult. That would be difficult to do. I sort of admire authors who successfully manage to do that.
Right. Yeah. Grady Hendrix. I would check him out.
I will.
I was thinking that it makes a lot of sense that you would read a lot of nonfiction, because for the thing that you're writing, you have to stay on top of like the most recent papers and the most recent research, and because like you said, you don't want to write outdated information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the a lot of that just comes in terms of research that you kind of have to do. But I think it helps when you kind of enjoy what you're researching, and that just becomes, when you're just reading a non-fiction book, it doesn't feel like hard research. That's just you're reading for the fun of it, and you're absorbing it that way. The difficult thing when it comes to non-fiction books, particularly with paleontology, is that quite often by the time they're published, they're already outdated because things move really quickly. So I tend to find that for paleontology, it's better to kind of get most up-to-date information from the internet where possible.
Magazines and
books
stuff
are great. Don't use it as like a Bible, because just accepting what's in there is quite possibly wrong now already. And I do wonder, how long is it going to be before my own book is hopelessly outdated?
Yeah, I've read science fiction books that were supposed to be set in like the early 2000s, but they were written in even as late as the 90s, and none of the people have cell phones, and because they couldn't have known how what our smartphones would look like,
how ubiquitous they would be.
Yes,
just everywhere.
Yeah, I think a lot of I think particularly in the 80s, there was a sort of phase in the 80s where all science fiction was set sort of 20 or 30 years in the future, and I think that was ambitious, to be honest.
Right. It's almost better to write about far-reaching.
Yeah, you set it so far ahead that you'll never be proven wrong. That's
right.
You must be brave authors. Whatever happens.
Yeah, they were very brave to do that. Oh my gosh.
It didn't ruin the story necessarily, but there are several times when you're chuckling to yourself every time they're like, "Get to the payphone." You're like,
Right.
And it creates like an alt universe feeling where they never developed cell phones.
Right. Oh my gosh, yeah. How do you deal with writer's block? Do you ever have a problem with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think quite often, I think I find most commonly the writer's block comes in the form of sort of big picture plot holes or things that I think, this just doesn't really make sense.
Right.
And yeah, I think that the best way generally to get around that is to just go into something else. Go and wash dishes or
Right.
put a wash on. Do something that doesn't really require you to engage your brain in that task and just sort of let your mind wander. And it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't work immediately, but eventually you'll come up with some ideas, and maybe they won't quite work, but maybe they'll lead to something else. And so yeah, just sort of occupying the hands but not the mind.
Yes.
I think that tends to work for me.
I would 100% agree with that. My hand's busy, mind's not, and you can kind of mull over things. Yeah.
Get up and move.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting the blood flow going is also very helpful. The blood goes to your brain too.
Right. What has been your most significant writing victory so far?
I think the sort of moment that stands out. So there's a very arguably the most famous paleontologist in the world at the moment is a man named Robert De Palma, and he about a year ago now sent me an email asking for a copy of the Lazarus taxa. I think that was the moment that I sort of thought, that's it's beyond just my own little bubble now.
Right.
That's amazing.
And I think what was really interesting is that one of the sort of main dinosaurs, one of the kind of primary antagonistic dinosaurs, was the Dakota raptor. And he discovered that animal and he named it.
Oh wow!
So I thought that was really interesting. And he sent me in return. I'll tell you what, I've got it here. Hang on.
Oh sure.
Yeah, he sent me one of these in return, which is
my gosh, that's amazing!
It's not a real one, but it's a sort of really high quality cast of what I believe is the only fossil of this claw. I got that in the post from Florida from him, which I thought was really, really
that's
exciting.
So exciting! That's
amazing.
Wow, I have chills. Like someone that who is like forefront in the field was like, your book.
Well, that was it. And I had to double take when I saw the email because I thought, I thought it can't be that uncommon of a name. It's probably just a coincidence.
It can't be that De Palma, right?
Is it some sort of prank or a scam?
Right.
And I think sort of reading through the email, I think this actually is him. I think he actually is him. That was it was quite surreal.
I got chills. That's amazing. And then you got such a cool replica too, like from the experience.
I did, yes. It's sort of pride of place on my little shelf now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a cool story to be able to tell too. Yeah, I love that. All right, so our last question of the night is one of my favorite things to ask people, but is there writing advice that you hate?
I think hate would maybe be a strong word.
Right.
The writing advice that annoys me a little is when people just say, "Oh, just read." I think most authors read anyway.
Right.
And I don't think that's particularly helpful advice. I think that's just, it's like, I don't think anyone decides to write a book without a reader.
Right. Well, and there's a particular way of reading that is helpful as a writer, right? If you're just reading and you're just finding, this is entertaining, this is a good time, you're not necessarily reading it as a writer to help you improve your writing. So
that's it. Yeah, and I think if the advice was along the lines of, have a look at how the plot's laid out, have a look at how to develop characters, read books to see, but that's never the advice that's given. The advice is just read, and you'll be able to write better. And it's not helpful.
I have
Yeah.
particular authors where I'll read, but I'm actually studying their style. Like, how do they set up this tension, or how do they do their imagery? Or how does this person capture emotions?
Right.
I actually read to study their technique, and like, you can absolutely read for enjoyment and entertainment and everything, but it's a slightly different feel than actually studying how that author does something well.
Right.
Absolutely, and I think that I've found sort of in the past couple of years, I've kind of reread books that I read when I was young, and you read it in a sort of completely different light now.
Yeah,
When I read it when I was a kid, I was like, oh, this is so cool, and reading it, now as maybe just as an adult, but I think particularly as a writer, I'm like, oh,
right.
that's why it was cool.
Yeah,
Is that
the
something
why
I can
behind
do?
it. Right.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't ruin a book, but you sort of analyze it a little more,
Right.
than just soaking it in.
Yeah. I was always kind of the English major when I was reading or watching movies and things like that. So for me, like, I know a book is really good when I forget to analyze it and I'm just caught up in what's going to happen next, right? But it is very rewarding to also read a book and be like, oh, I really love the way the author does this, this, and this, and that's why I love this book. Yeah, it is really rewarding to read it as a writer too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. Yes. We do want to offer you the opportunity to tell us where our audience can find you online, learn more about you and your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of predominantly deal with my sort of chat with my readers and engage on Facebook. My Facebook page is just Lindsey Kinsella /author. And yeah, you can find the Lazarus Taxa is currently on sale. You can find it on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, all the usual places. The Heart of Pangea is already out, coming to you from the future, and it can also be purchased at any of the usual places you buy books. Really, I don't think there are many where it isn't, and I have a cheeky little copy of the new one. It's still a proof copy because it's not even out yet.
Yeah,
really beautiful.
That is nice.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yes, and congratulations on finishing another book. Always an accomplishment we should celebrate. So thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you to everyone listening along at home. Check out our next episode, which will come out Friday. And remember, there's more than one way up a mountain. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show, or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijingsrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.